Hello and welcome to APTN National News this first day of November. I'm Sav Jonesa. In Manitoba, the RCMP have identified an infant whose remains were found at a rural property north of Winnipeg in June.
It was from the Mutang First Nation, and so like I say, the family was living off of Highway 6. The remains were located in a barn on that property, which has since changed hands.
Police say Xavier Butler was between 1 and 2 years old when she died. Her death is being investigated as a homicide. The Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations held their annual assembly in Saskatoon this week. Election campaigns for third vice chief, first vice chief, and chief were on the agenda. The election for these three positions was yesterday. Video journalist Rachel May has the results.
On Thursday at 9 a.m., 1,029 eligible voters lined up to cast their ballots before the 11 a.m. deadline. They included chiefs, council members, and selected elders from each community with numbers based on population. Throughout the day, many voters told APTN they were unsure who would be elected, feeling the race was very close. While waiting for results, former chief of Little Pine First Nation, Wayne Samaginis, said he hoped that whoever took a leadership position would focus on restoring guidance to the 74 First Nations represented by the FSIN.
I wish that they would try to work more through the Senate to have that elders' guidance, go more to praying for each other, to pray for how we can work together and live together and do something right for the people that really need help, which are the people on our home reserves.
At about 4 p.m. local time, the results were announced. All positions were decided on the first ballot, as a second ballot is only required if the top candidates are within 5% of each other. Fabian Head was elected third vice chief with 507 votes. His closest rival was Reginald Belrose with 133. Belrose and the four other candidates garnered a combined 518 votes.
I'm truly honored to be standing here in front of you as our third vice chief. You know, it's a dream come true, and you know, I want to say to the youth out there that are out there, you believe in yourself, you can do it.
David Pratt was re-elected for his third term as first vice chief with an overwhelming 849 votes. The two other candidates had a combined 180 votes.
All of us were taught by our katek, our kokums, our mushrooms, our moms and dads to treat people with respect, to be kind, to be generous. And those are the values that I follow in my leadership and that I've seen in Chief Cameron too as well.
The campaign for chief was acrimonious. Voters were reminded of the ongoing forensic audit of FSIN finances by the federal government. Cameron himself was accused of financial wrongdoing. His only opponent, Ali Bear, endured unfounded personal attacks. But Cameron still beat Bear 765 votes to 258.
That's why I'm here today. We don't do this for us, we do this for our children. We do this for our unborn children, to have a better life than we had, to have more opportunities to succeed in life than we ever had, so that they make better choices than we ever had.
Cameron didn't address the criticism during the campaign, but after he won.
First, this was we want to say we denounce any political attacks on any candidate. We totally oppose that way. We always want to continue to run a clean campaign, a kind campaign.
Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
A Mi'kmaq mother may lose support under Jordan's principle to care for her 3 children as the Ottawa and Nova Scotia governments disagree over who should deliver the services. Angel Moore reports.
Mary Isaac is a single mother of 3. She has had cerebral palsy all of her life and requires a wheelchair. Isaac mostly lived independently until she was hit by a car 2 years ago.
Yeah, so it's been like a rough go, because from the hospital, like, the only reason why I applied for this service to even be in my house in the first place was I wanted to ensure that my children's needs were not interrupted.
Isaac's 3 children, ages 4, 10, and 11 years old, require special needs services. Since Isaac's accident, they need 24-hour in-home support and services that are paid for under Jordan's Principle. But the support from Indigenous Services Canada is short-term and ended yesterday. Isaac is afraid her children will end up in care if she can't find resources elsewhere.
But Jordan's Principle bottom line has been more focused on a reduction plan and an alternative plan that doesn't exist. And they leave it up to you to find that resource.
Cindy Blackstock is the Executive Director of First Nations Child and Family Caring Society of Canada. She says Isaac's case includes all the concerns raised at the Human Rights Tribunal last September.
Part of the tribunal has said that, look, if you are going to say no to an urgent case, and this is an urgent case, then you have to come up with Plan B. You, the department, have to come up with a Plan B.
Isaac's lawyer, David Taylor, told APTN News Indigenous Services Canada will be extending Jordan's Principle support for 3 weeks, while Isaac appeals her case in federal court and requests long-term care.
Have we not learned anything from everything we've seen come out from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2015 through the $23.3 billion child welfare class action settlement in 2023? First Nations kids belong with their parents. These kids have a very loving mother who cares and works very hard for them, and she needs some help, and she should have it. That's why she's going to court.
Taylor hopes the federal court will agree Isaac needs long-term care.
I currently only have access to the service that's in my house through Jordan's Principle, and they still want to cut it off and call CPS. That's not like a Truth and Reconciliation work. That's very colonial, actually, in the structure. It's a very colonial way of thinking.
Isaac hopes to hear soon if the decision to end her support is overturned. Meanwhile, APTN News asked Indigenous Services why Isaac's services are ending. A spokesperson replied in an email that they cannot comment out of respect for privacy for the children. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Tjibuktuk, also known as Halifax.
A newly formed organization for Indigenous reproductive justice launched a national registry for survivors on Friday. The Survivors Circle for Reproductive Justice aims to help Indigenous victims of forced or coerced sterilization. The nonprofit corporation was formed in October. According to a Survivors Circle press release, the registry will help raise awareness, inform research on prevention measures, and bring survivors together for healing and wellness. The Quebec Native women called on the United Nations to support the establishment of an Indigenous ombudsman in Quebec, someone who would be independent of any affiliation with provincial and federal governments. They made their appeal last month in Geneva during the 89th session of the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. They asked the UN to investigate injustices against women and girls in the province. The organization also called on the government of Quebec to acknowledge the existence of systemic racism and to take measures to correct it.
L'idée de mettre en place un service d'ombudsman va permettre effectivement au niveau des peuples autochtones, que ce soit au Québec ou à l'échelle canadienne aussi également, d'avoir un service qui va être offert de façon indépendante et en toute neutralité aussi également. On sait que le gouvernement du Québec, à ce moment-ci, donne la charge aux protecteurs du citoyen de pouvoir faire en sorte de mettre en place un service comme tel, mais les Premières Nations et également les femmes autochtones ont plus ou moins confiance à ce moment-ci.
The federal and Quebec governments have still not come to an agreement regarding the protection of woodland caribou in northern Quebec. During a press conference earlier today in Montreal, APTN News asked Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault for an update on this decades-long issue. The caribou are an endangered species in Canada. They're federally protected, but not in the province of Quebec. Ottawa said if Quebec does not address the issue, it will intervene. Quebec's Environment Minister Benoit Charest has warned the federal government to not step in and that protecting the caribou could threaten the economic survival of regions in Quebec which depend on forestry.
There needs to be an agreement on caribou, and if there isn't, obviously we will move forward with an emergency order, but Indigenous peoples need to be at the table for this agreement, whether it's for conservation, whether it's how we move forward with forestry in Quebec. Indigenous peoples have been ignored for too long, and they deserve a seat at the table.
We need to step aside for a moment now, but when we return, more insight into the rejected $47.8 billion child welfare reform deal. Stay tuned. Welcome back. It's still unclear what the next steps are for the First Nations child welfare reform after the rejection by chiefs of a $47.8 billion final settlement agreement. One person who could shed some light on the plan going forward is Hol Salem, the council chairperson of the Squamish Nation. A resolution he brought forward was approved by chiefs at the recent special assembly in Calgary. He joins us now. Cole Salem, thank you for joining us. What happens with the child welfare negotiations now?
There's a number of processes that will have to take place, one of which is the formation of a Children's Chiefs Commission that was mandated by resolutions at the recent Special Chiefs Assembly. That would include representation from all the regions across Canada, including regions that are no longer participating in the AFN. They would then assemble a new negotiation team with new legal advisors to then re-engage with Canada to look to make amendments to the agreement that was negotiated but ultimately rejected by the chiefs and proxies at the recent assembly.
And what would you like to see changed in the agreement?
There's a number of issues and challenges that I think that came from multiple regions. We heard that there was a number of regions that had submitted feedback to the AFN, but those changes were not incorporated. So most of the changes were cosmetic, not substantial. I think some of the changes have to deal with the long-term commitment around funding. The provisions that currently in there require annual budgetary approval processes. So even if the government were to change, future governments could still decide to underfund and discriminate against First Nations children through the previous agreement. So that would have to change. There was a lot of gaps in terms of the governance of the implementation and the structure of the implementation, including representation from the regions. It still gave a lot of authority to Canada to control and oversee the implementation, or to the AFN, or to the plaintiffs, which included 2 organizations from Ontario, but not fair or equal representation for all the regions across Canada. So the governance of implementation, I think, is another issue that needs to be resolved.
Okay, yeah. And one of the other big complaints that we heard is that chiefs were not involved or, kept up to speed. How will this new process change that?
That's a really good question. So, going back to July, it was announced that there was a final settlement agreement. It was then released after the July SCA or annual general meeting. And there was a real push by the AFN to have it approved as quickly as possible without any fair process or time for First Nations leadership to review the proposal, to make amendments to the proposal, and then consider a final draft. The new process that we've approved at the Assembly recently is that there has to be a period of time of 120 days when a final agreement is put forward for chiefs to be able to review and understand the agreement. There has to be a process where there's a back and forth with the regions and with the First Nations that a draft agreement would put forward, and there's an opportunity to provide more feedback, more recommendations, amendments if needed, until all the regions can build consensus and support. So it really speaks to process, that we're going to have enough time to include the experts, include the First Nations leadership that want to be consulted meaningfully on this. And so my nation, for example, Squamish Nation, sent multiple letters to both Canada and the AFN objecting to their process, which we received no response to. So our hope is that the new process will be transparent and communicate through a back and forth dialogue.
That sounds great. And we still haven't heard from the national chief. Do you know what her role is in this now?
I would say that what's been challenging is that a lot of the conversations and discussions around this from the AFN have been led through the National Chief's office. The National Chief, prior to becoming National Chief, was the portfolio holder for this item, and then chose to retain that portfolio after being elected as National Chief. So has been a main key point person and spokesperson overseeing the file. And I think it speaks to a real challenge of her leadership, that she's oversaw the complete failure of approval by the chiefs at the recent Special Chiefs Assembly. The fact that they've spent multiple years negotiating this to get to a place where the chiefs resoundingly reject it, I think speaks to a real disconnect between the National Chief and what First Nations across the country are wanting to see. So I think there needs to be a change in approach. I think some of the commentary we've seen from the National Chief as well has been very inflammatory towards those who opposed the final settlement agreement. There has been an acknowledgement, I think, by the National Chief of the real fundamental flaws that were identified. And I think an acknowledgement that there needs to be a commitment to a better process, a new process that builds consensus, builds strength and unity, and not a divisive process.
Has anyone from the federal government reached out to you at all?
No, we sent a letter to the Prime Minister and Minister Patty Haiju in August, We sent another one in October in follow-up to our August letter. We have received no response, no communication, no response of any kind from Canada, which I think is a real disappointment. When Canada speaks to reconciliation, engaging with First Nations, and they haven't responded to our concerns or even our requests to meet to discuss the matter. Our contention and our point is that Canada cannot discharge its duties to delegate the role of consulting First Nations to the AFN, that Canada has to play a role in directly consulting and engaging with First Nations as title and rights holders directly. But we've been disappointed to receive no response so far.
Well, we're really going to be following this quite closely, but we'll have to leave the interview there. That's Hol Salem, the council chairperson of the Squamish Nation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We're taking one last break now, but coming up, a new mural the length of a 15-story building was unveiled in Winnipeg. Stick around to take a look.
This mural serves as a direct and profound act of resistance
Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. It was an Adams family Halloween for Kiera Grubin and family. That little Wednesday knocked it out of the park for the photo. We hope everyone had a safe and happy evening. Thanks for all the great photos. Keep them coming by sending your pictures to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Let's see what Saturday has in store. It'll be 3 and rainy in St. John's, 7 and rain in Fredericton, 3 and some cloud in Cartwright, and 0 in Kuujjuaq. Montreal will be 6, Quebec City will be 5. Toronto and London and Sarnia will be 10. Wawa and Sioux Lookout will be 6 and some rain. It'll be -4 in Churchill tomorrow, 7 in God's Lake and Norway House. It'll be 8 in Winnipeg, Gimli, and Brandon. 10 in Regina, 11 in Yorkton. It'll be -4 in Stony Rapids and Uranium City, a little bit of cloud as well. Saturday will be 1 in Fort McMurray, 0 in Peace River, 11 in Lethbridge and 6 in Calgary. Vancouver will be 10 in Rainy and 7 in some cloud in Kamloops. -5 in Fort Nelson with some snow, 4 in Smithers. Whitehorse will be -2 and -11 in Rock River. -4 in Yellowknife, -5 in Wrigley. Sax Harbor will be -16 in snow. Tuktoyaktuk will be -14 in snow as well. -8 in Well Cove, -9 in Cambridge Bay. Iqaluit will be -5 in snow, -13 in snow in Resolute. Winnipeg is home to over 600 vibrant murals. Now the city skyline has one more, the length of a 15-story building. It's been done by the Manitoba government as part of their Greater Indigenous Women's Strategy. With more, here's T.R. Wheatley.
The feather up above.
This feather painted on this building in downtown Winnipeg is a replica of this eagle feather given to Ginny Whitebird over a decade ago by an MMIWG family member. It came at a time when the artist began her own journey down the Red Road.
I was so far from the place that he spoke about, but he said, this feather will lead the way.
Whitebird and her assistant Charles Johnson spent the past 6 weeks painting this mural called Gizagigo, an Anishinaabe word meaning you are loved. It's part of Manitoba's Greater Indigenous Women's Strategy, says Minister of Families and Gender Equity Nahani Fontaine.
For generations, Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited have endured misogynistic, degrading, marginalizing, and harmful narratives. This mural serves as a direct and profound act of resistance.
Cora Morgan is the province's special advisor for Indigenous women's issues. She said spirituality can be seen on this mural with pieces of the full moon and water ceremonies weaved into it.
We thought that a full moon would be very symbolic of everything that we want good for the women. We also have representation, the Métis carried out in the floral depiction, and we have the Inukshuk to represent the Inuit.
The community also danced hand in hand to honor the spirits of the women and girls lost and to welcome the spirit this artwork carries, a gesture that has helped Whitebird come full circle.
Very empowering to do this because I'm old. I'm older than I've ever been, and I had a birthday recently, and in a couple years I'm going to be 60. So it was really neat to know that I could do this.
The Manitoba government is expected to roll out the Greater Indigenous Women's Strategy on November 22nd, aimed at helping protect some of the province's most vulnerable. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
And with that, our newscast this beautiful Friday evening has come to an end. If you're looking for more stories, please visit our website at aptnnews.ca. I'm Sav Jonesa, and from all of us here at APTN, thank you so much for joining us and have a great weekend.